This is part two or episode two, and it's only a couple of minutes after I ended the first one. So I intend to just outline my life from childhood so that by the time I get to what's here and now, you'll have a full understanding of how speaking up and doing the right thing and not being fearful of negative impact or losing your job, losing your friends by speaking up and stopping abusive or negative people negatively impacting others. So you do pay the price, especially if you haven't already ensured your financial security, have your own home, not renting because you're at the mercy of horrible real estate agents or horrible landlords. Sometimes you can have wonderful real estate agents and terrible landlords, or terrible real estate agents and lovely landlords that won't go against their horrid real estate agents because it's business for them and they want to be looked after by that real estate agent. So I've learned that one very early. But as a child, my sister being 10 years older than me, my eldest brother being 12 years older than me, they were still living at home until I was probably 6 years old, which not even, I would have been about 5 when my eldest brother moved out of home because he and my father, my eldest brother then being, 17, and he wasn't a horrible person. He was a bit sour and a bit of a smart aleck, but he wasn't a horrible person that I remember, at that young age. My sister was still living at home. We shared a bedroom. The boys, three of them shared one room. My little brother slept in my parents' room until he was about 3 because there really wasn't any room. And the cot was, like a single bed back then. So, yeah, my eldest brother, I remember a fight with him and my dad. He would have been like 17, I think. And my dad, in the scuffle in the dining room, my brother ended up backed into the window in the dining room and the window smashed. And all I remember from them was from that altercation was that my eldest brother moved to my Auntie Gwen's and Uncle Jim's home, and he basically boarded with them. Now, Robert Zoom was, he was working for a business at that time, and he had been working, it was the local soft drink bottling establishment. I haven't thought of that for probably 50 years. And so he always worked. Very likable, but he was definitely one of those a-holes that his friends would kind of always be sucking up to him. And he was quite humorous and had a good sense of humour, and people liked him. I just remember the buff hair, like almost the afro style of hair. He had thick curls and kind of that shiny look. My sister had a little bit more frizzy but still thick hair. My favourite brother, the third born, Paul, he had my style of hair, which is very curly, finer hair and thinner, so that our curls turned into frizz. And Paul had one of the best kind of mop afros. But he was very cool, very artsy, kind. My eldest brother always said that Paul was selfish, but that's not something that ever impacted, because he was no more selfish than my eldest brother and my sister, 10 years older than me. They'd do exactly what they wanted to do whenever they wanted to do it. And even if it really negatively impacted our parents' emotions, where at least Paul would be approachable and he would have the discussions about whether it was where he was living, the people that he was hanging out with, all that kind of thing. He would engage and discuss and then do whatever it was that he wanted to do. So I do believe that he was the best of us, because I only see the other 4 as insecure bullies, a-holes, liars, and really destructive. But my parents, particularly my mother, she was very disappointed when my youngest brother married the person that he's married to now, because my mother said that she brought out the worst in my brother. My brother's and youngest brother's a selfish a-hole, but he always had a little bit of respect for others. Mum and dad, in a way. Love mum and dad, absolutely love mum, like love mum, but didn't mean that he treated her, um, you know, in an exemplary manner. Um, but she felt the love. There's no doubt about that. I'll have to think about a little bit how to describe that kind of behaviour, because to me, it's an educational thing to depict the the behaviour and it not be completely negative or through rose-coloured glasses. But my youngest brother definitely um, loved my parents, and he actually showed them more respect than the one 5 years older than me, and then my sister, and then my eldest brother. My eldest brother was sneaky and always said his horrid stuff and trashing and everything to all his friends behind my parents' back. But the good thing was that all of his friends and his wife's friends really respected my parents and always treated them really well, regardless of what my brother and his wife would say. Like, kind of trashing. Like, my parents did absolutely everything they could for all of us. The next one up, 5 years older than me, when he and his wife were building and decorating their home, um, they got everything at cost price from mum and dad, and mum and dad did a lot of work for them, with curtains and floor coverings and everything they possibly could. My parents did the same for all of them because they still had a full home furnishing business. And so, yeah, sourcing from that business, and my father, doing the floor coverings and all that kind of thing, even when he was in his 60s and 70s. They got a lot from my parents and gave them very little, except for a lot of heartache whenever these four siblings particularly, would argue or try to damage each other, trash each other, even dishonestly. My mother would ring me because I lived away from the area from 93, and my mother would ring me, whether it was in the ski fields or me in Sydney. My mother would ring me and say, so and so is doing this to so and so. They're damaging, because they all work for themselves at one point, and damaging their businesses, their reputations. But mum didn't really understand that. I didn't know either, that all of their friends, their closest circle of friends, were all just unethical people, whether it was real estate, banking, doctors, lawyers, everything, every area. The people that they were closest to were people that you don't trust, that are really sweet on the surface, but will take advantage of you behind your back, or not do the right thing and stop negative impact when you're a business person doing the right thing. So I feel that I've got a little bit off track there, but trying to establish, my upbringing with my family, and yeah, starting with the youngest, 5 years younger than me, very dedicated to mum and dad in a way, but still was incredibly selfish. When mum was really, really sick with cancer, he would rock up with his three little ones. And his three little ones weren't like my child, who would kind of run around picking up things and tidying up for Nana if she was cooking or something, or he would just help. He'd go and help pop in the garden or something like that, where my brother's three little ones, um, they'd be allowed to walk around the house eating and cause mess, and mum would never say anything. And my this youngest brother would go and lay on the lounge and call out to my mother, is the kettle on? So she'd have to stop what she's doing and go and make a cup of tea for this big lug laying on the lounge, while his wife is there in the house as well. And she was relatively helpful, but there was also kids running around making a mess. And my child, because I was close to my mum, and my child, when he was hanging out with them, would be so helpful to them, I didn't know for some time that I was being dishonestly trashed for being at my parents, because even my mongrel siblings could see that when I was there, I was cleaning and doing errands for my parents and trying to support them in every way I could. And my child wasn't making mess. I was there with my child, looking after my child. He wasn't one horrid auntie, my mother's younger sister, just a revolting human being, um, would say, who lives in Queensland. And when she visited, all she would do was create stress. She, one time to my face, in front of my child when he was about 7, said, "Oh, you're dumping your son here." And it's like, no, I'm not dumping my son here. My mother has phoned me this afternoon to say that her cancer is back. So I've brought my son to stay the night with her to elevate her spirits because he's fun and lovely. And even when things are sad, the pair of them still talk and say funny things to each other and talk about the weather, whatever it is. And that particular auntie had had a few wines down, and she shouldn't have been staying with my mother, but she imposed herself on my mother. And I grabbed my child and left that night. And yeah, Angus was 7, so it was 2007, yeah, close to, yeah, 2008, closer towards that end of the year. I'm just picturing when Mum rang me, I just packed up everything for Angus for the night and raced up there. And then I was just kind of going through his things, unpacking and planning his clothes for the next day. And I was ironing his pajamas and his clothes and everything. And this drunkard, who's well off and, you know, all the rest of it, she's there, "You're ironing your kids' pajamas." And it's like, I iron the pajamas and I'll do as I want and it pleases me. That's kind of how I answered her. And I was shocked by her, always knowing how horrid she could be, but was very shocked at her behavior. And she continued with the trashing, and then eventually she said, "What, you're dumping your son here for the night?" And I said, "No, he's here to cheer up my mother. I couldn't stay the night because that would mean I'd have to bring the dogs with us. I had my store. I think I already had my store at that time, so I would have been having to open the store in the morning. But I was coming back to get Angus that day, so it might have been whatever the reason was that I was coming back the next day to get Angus. I just wanted him and my mother to kind of lift each other up because, yeah, she got the news that the cancer was back, and as strong as she was incredibly upset, and we were very teary over the phone. So we were living in Merimbula at the time, which is only 20 odd minutes from Bega, and I just packed everything up and took Angus up there. And so the harassment from this horrid auntie was pretty much from the time we arrived, but then it revealed, and I knew there was an element anyway. My eldest sister is friends with this auntie's eldest daughter. That eldest daughter is a sour, snobby, stuck up, blah, blah, blah style of person who I first noticed was rude to me when my son was about 2, when I raced to Sydney, when we found that my dad's checkup saw him straight into hospital and having heart bypass surgery. So I jumped in the car and drove my 2-year-old up so that my father could see my baby because they were already really close, and Angus really loved his pop. So we went to the hospital and visited him the night before his surgery and just cheered him up and let him know that we were there. And the next day, this horrid auntie's eldest daughter was at the cafe where Mum, my eldest sister, my only sister, and the next one up 5 years older than me, we all went out for lunch at Crow's Nest, I believe. And this particular cousin, she was just smart alecky to me. And I didn't know at that time, so that would have been 2002. I didn't know at that time that my sister was dishonestly trashing me to like her friends or relatives like this, that this cousin, she didn't really get on with anyone else. Her and her husband, he was the chief accountant for IBM, I think in the 80s, and, you know, lived in Sydney, Balmain. She's a school teacher, blah, blah, blah. But that horrid behaviour, I was curious about when we were sitting at the cafe in 2002 when I drove all the way to Sydney, a 6 hour drive with my baby. We'd have to stop because he'd need his exercise and, little pit stops because he slept most of the way anyway. And to be dealing with this kind of behavior the next day because we stayed up there a few days. I stayed in a separate motel near the hospital, and my mother, the next one up, male brother, 5 years from me, and my sister all stayed in accommodation that was attached to the hospital. And I didn't want to change anything that they were doing, and I didn't want to stay in the same space as them either. So family get these access to this accommodation, and it's generally one big room with a few beds. Was it Royal Prince Alfred on the north side? Royal North Shore sounds more like it because it is on the north side. So probably Royal North Shore. And so I got an abusive phone call the first night that I was there, or the first night that I was there. We landed after going to visit my father and cheering him up until it was time for him to go to bed and lights out at the hospital. And my son at 2 had a lovely time. We went back to the motel and I got this seething phone call from my mother's other sister, who's also a complete a-hole, but fun, another drunkard, drinks, they all drink too much except for my mother, and the nastiness doesn't even require any kind of alcohol, um, like my own siblings. And she was abusing me over the phone for not staying with my mother, my sister, and 5 years older brother. And I was shocked by that because I'd never had anything like that occur with my aunties or uncles or anything like that. And it stemmed from my sister being a mongrel of a thing and a kind of jealousy of me having the gumption and the ability and the confidence to jump in the car with my baby. And the day after we find out, well, Dad, he's come up to Sydney for a checkup with my Uncle Jim, who recommended his heart doctor, and they've put him straight into hospital for a bypass. The nastiness and jealousy from my sister, 10 years older than me, was like I was encroaching on her moment of being in Sydney, supporting mum with the 5 years older. He can take time off as he please because he worked for himself, but they all can because they're all working for themselves except for the eldest male. And so that was a real eye-opener in 2002. I was really shocked by the way that they behaved. And my nagging mother, she always tried to get me to ignore how horrible they were. So this horrid behaviour at the lunch the next day with the horrid cousin whose mother's the nastiest horror. Why are you ironing your son's pajamas? There's something wrong with you, was actually what she said. And I've always been really confident in what I do and always backing myself unless I can see that I'm doing something wrong. But this horrid behavior was just trashing for the sake of trashing because, I iron pajamas, I iron everything, and I wear linen all the time, but I iron the linen, and then when it starts to crush, it doesn't matter as long as I put it on and it's ironed. So just trying to reveal a little bit more my personality, super confident, intolerant of horrid people, intolerant of horrid, nasty comments, but respond to it calmly and objectively and in a business-like manner, because you've got to continue living and being around these people as well. So you don't want to be the one accused of ratty behaviour, because the number of turkeys in my family that carry on with ratty behaviour, they're the majority. So you're going to be outnumbered if you respond to them the way that they carry on in the same way. If you do that, then there's more of them all acting the same way all the time and all covering each other's backsides, that you're going to be then singled out because as the norm, you're nothing like them. And that's the same with employment. If you come in and you're really professional and you do a great job and you support everyone who needs a bit of guidance or wants your help, if you're that person all the time, but you're dealing with, harassing, insecure, and mentally just horrid people, if you start acting that way, then you're going to be singled out as the problem, because they wouldn't be getting away with acting in that negative manner unless there was maybe a manager, or they've got more colleagues that kind of back them and cover for them. They'd lose their job if they didn't have management or colleagues with a little bit of influence supporting them. So if you're enduring people like that in a work environment that have been there before you, and this is how they behave, you've got to work around it. If you have the confidence like I do, I address it always in writing. This is the behaviour that's going on. It's unacceptable. It's actually unlawful here in Australia. And watch what happens. You immediately find out if they are supported by management, and you find that you're treated more negatively. If you're working in casual employment, they think that they can just take you off the roster, you're casual. Well, if they've taken you off the roster and you're casual, but they've done it because you've spoken up about negative behaviour that is against the laws of workplace environments in Australia, you've got a leg to stand on. You can have them held accountable if they've done this because you've spoken up like a reasonable person who doesn't tolerate abuse of anyone, customers, staff, the employer's right to get their best from their employees, then you're in the right and you can stand up for yourself. So you can bring all of that back to a family that, like mine, the majority are just a-holes. My mother being one of 9, she loved so much her eldest brother, because even though he was, a smart aleck like the rest of them, Mum wasn't a smart aleck. She was quite funny, but she wasn't a smart aleck. Her eldest, she just loved him because he would step in and stand up for whoever was being picked on, and he would muck about and kind of make fun of certain things, but it was more loving. And she just loved him. And then, so her other 7, fun, obnoxious, all well off, all a-holes. Her other eldest brother, Kevin, she really, really liked him as well. But he was more of a smart aleck. Like, he would be more funny, but he would kind of be a little bit more relentless in his making fun. He always called me as a kid Little Beryl, because I was chubby by the age of, I would say, heading from 9 years old. My parents had been in the store for at least a year, if not 2. I became a little bit chubbier at that time when I was 9. So this uncle Kevin would call me Little Beryl, and I always thought it was funny, but he meant it that my mum was always overweight, and actually the rest of her sisters always skinny. So my mum was overweight, and so he called me Little Beryl, and that was fine because I really liked my mum. She was actually the prettiest out of her 4 sisters, and the softest face, the nicest person, the most practical and kind and reasonable. The others, bar one, just a-holes, nasty, insecure, trashing, and amusing though. The other sister that was a little bit different, she would blindly always stand up for one of them, no matter how horrid she was. So even if that one was horrid to my mother, this other less horrible one would still stand up for the horrid one and tell my mother that she was being unreasonable, where my mother was never unreasonable. My mother was practical. She spoke up, but she didn't actively take action as I do. I actively stand up for people and speak up and don't care enough about the negative repercussions to not speak up. There's just nothing in me that will not speak up. And that's what's now leading to what was kind of imposed on my child and I from pretty much the start, because I moved, nagging mother, I moved back down the coast when he was 4 months old, and I shouldn't have. because it put me in the thick of it. I only ever supported my family members and their spouses and had no idea what they were doing. My nose is actually itchy. That's not a mannerism or anything. My nose just got itchy on the end, so it's just, yeah, it's not a what do you call the soothing, like if people touch here, it's kind of like soothing while they're thinking and all that kind of thing. That was, my nose was actually itchy. So I'm still sorry about the blue light reflecting in these glasses, and at some point maybe I can do something about that. But anyway, thanks for listening to episode 2, chapter 2. It's going to get more interesting, I can guarantee you.